On this peaceful morning, the church headquarters remained empty. As if everyone could feel something out of the ordinary, the atmosphere was eerily quiet and heavy. Just the night prior, Sister Reyna Aburto had gotten a private message. Her secret audience had been requested by President Nelson himself. For some reason, she had the impression that this meeting would be different from the others. With a somewhat quicker heart rate than normal, she arrived ahead of schedule. She entered the quiet meeting room after adjusting her shawl, taking a deep breath, and quietly praying. As the morning sun filtered through the big windows, it cast a gentle glow around the area. The chairs were all beautifully set out, but President Nelson was sitting alone. With his hands folded and his gaze fixed ahead, as if deep in contemplation, he sat silently. His face lit up with a subtle smile as he glanced up and caught sight of her. "Reyna," he said, his voice betraying a mix of comfort and wariness. She sat down across from him, uncertain of how to respond, and politely nodded, saying, "Thank you for coming." It was very natural for them to remain silent. It was wholly full of feelings that words could not describe. She had encountered him on numerous occasions during gatherings, conferences, and in in-depth conversations concerning the church and its members. However, his appearance changed today. Something calm pervaded his demeanor despite his seemingly lowered shoulders and slower gait. He appeared wise and exhausted, as if he had been bearing the burden of innumerable prayers for an extended period of time. A part of his delicate countenance prevented Rhea from inquiring as to his well-being. There was no time for inquiries at this moment. Listening was the moment. Neither of them said a word for several minutes. The chamber was hushed save for the sound of the wall clock's delicate ticking. There was a peculiar stillness, not devoid of sound but replete with significance. Without haste, Rhea allowed herself to sense that he had summoned her for a purpose. Meanwhile, she did nothing. Silence, she had realized through the years, can be a catalyst for profound expression. By the end of the speech, President Nelson leaned in closer and said, "There are things that can't be written in talks or spoken on stages." Rhea responded, "Some things must be passed heart to heart." Although she didn't completely grasp his meaning, she sensed that she was about to hear something unforgettable. He didn't sound like a leader issuing orders. The scene depicted an older buddy or mentor getting ready to reveal some very private information. The pressure of the moment seemed to be settling down on them, as if it were a heavy blanket. Humid, warm. The silence made her wonder if this was going to be any different from any other meeting. Perhaps this will be her final opportunity to sit across from him in such a manner. While they conversed, the sun rose higher in the sky, casting a gentle, golden light across the space. Time seemed to have stopped, as if the heavens were observing the unfolding of this discourse. As if he were trying to commit her features, her resilience, and her faith to memory. President Nelson glanced at her one final time. After a long inhalation, he briefly shut his eyes and said, "Before I go, there's something I need you to remember." At that moment, Sister Reyna's heart started to pound more rapidly. Even though she had no idea what those words would be, she was certain of one thing. His words, whatever they may be, would linger in her mind forever. Sister Rhea's thoughts kept wandering to their initial conversation as she sat across from President Nelson. It had happened a long time ago, before she ever thought she would be in a position of authority or have such strong relationships with him. At the time, she was still finding her footing as an introverted, reflective lady who, in big experienced spaces, frequently felt invisible. Nelson, the president, had taken note of her even at that age. As if he could perceive qualities in individuals that they themselves failed to perceive, he had this way of gazing at them from the inside out. When he initially described her as a compassionate voice, she recalled it vividly. She was taken aback by such remarks. She didn't think she could contribute much when she was younger. She worried she couldn't convey her true feelings because English wasn't her native tongue. Reyna, the spirit speaks clearer than words. When you speak with love, people will always understand you. That line had turned President Nelson's comments into a life-altering statement for her. It empowered her to speak out, contribute, and lead with grace instead of timidity. Rather than large, showy acts of affection, their relationship had developed over the years via more intimate, meaningful exchanges. She would occasionally receive a brief word of encouragement after a lengthy meeting, a look of appreciation when she preached truth from the pulpit, or a casual chat in the hallway. As a spiritual father who wished for her to thrive rather than merely survive, he had led her in more ways than one. His constant voice would reassure her that being brave doesn't imply being unafraid whenever she felt doubt or criticism creeping in. In addition, she recalled an instance when she had voiced her disagreement with a decision being made by their leadership council. For fear of being misunderstood, she had been hesitant to speak. However, her quiet had been noted by President Nelson. He subtly requested that she remain behind after the meeting. After everyone had departed, he spoke softly, "Reyna, your silence has weight. If the Spirit gives you something to say, you owe it to God to speak it." Her mouth dropped open at that instant. That was something she had never been told before. It was more than just authorization. I felt empowered. That was the day she knew he didn't consider her merely another leader or representative. To him, she was unique. She was a chosen one, competent and important. The bond transcended job descriptions and responsibilities. Honesty, caring, and respect were the cornerstones. His genuineness toward her had never wavered, unlike his treatment of everyone else. Yet it had an intensely personal quality for Rhea. Those memories were echoed in his soft gaze when she looked at him now, seated across the table in that peaceful setting. All the years of advice, insight, and generosity have culminated in this point. Their bond had always transcended mere communication, and this realization hit her hard. It centered on growth, spirituality, and mentoring. She had never before experienced the onset of such profound melancholy in her breast. Two leaders weren't merely having a chat. This was a shared experience between two spirits who had been through much together on the path of faith. Despite her lack of knowledge, she had a sense that his next words would emanate from the same wellspring as his previous lessons. Love, not authority, motivates it. Now the room was dead silent. The silence between them was broken only by the sound of the clocks ticking. As she waited for President Nelson to speak, Sister Reyna remained motionless, her hands lying on the table. Unfortunately, he failed to do so. I am not ready just yet. All he did was gaze at her, not with the piercing intensity of a leader doling out advice, but with the gentle intensity of someone whose words may never quite find the proper place. There was no discomfort, a holy place. Just being silent was a prayer in and of itself. With each passing second, Rhea could sense her heart becoming steadily heavier. There was an underlying feeling in her that this gathering had nothing to do with the church or leadership. Something more profound and individual was at work here. The expression on President Nelson's face betrayed a sense of tranquility that is often associated with a life of struggle. His previously solid hands quivered ever so slightly as they rested on the chair arm. His wary expression betrayed his emotional and mental exhaustion from bearing the weight of the world for what seemed like an eternity. At last, he broke the silence with a deep sigh. His words were gentle and measured, but they resounded in her like a bell. She hesitated to speak for fear of upsetting the sacred silence, but she nodded slightly as he went on. I've learned that in the Lord's work we are not called to speak louder, he said, his tone almost reflective. We're requested to pay closer attention. After that, he stopped, looking over the table at the sunshine streaming down. It seemed more like he was having a conversation with himself than with her. Suddenly, Reyna's throat clenched. Her respect for his vigor, determination, and courage had never waned. But now she was seeing his humanity, which was something else entirely. That openness had an endearing quality about it. Witnessing a guy who had inspired millions and exuded self-assurance in front of large audiences now sits quietly, allowing his silence to convey what words failed to convey. The experience brought up memories of times in Reyna's life when she'd experienced a profound sense of God's presence, not through miraculous events or blaring music, but through moments of profound, inexplicable tranquility. You have always understood silence better than most, President Nelson told her as he turned back to her. I wanted to see you because of it. With every word, his voice became softer. When there is no sound, not everyone can hear the Spirit's message. With tears in her eyes, Rhea swallowed forcefully. His meaning was crystal clear to her, yet she was at a loss for words. The reality was so obvious that no explanation was necessary. It was all in your gut. Now that the sun was directly on his face, she could make out the profound wrinkles of age brought about by his years of devotion, selflessness, and prayer. She had never before noticed how frail he appeared. Faith, not power, gave rise to a quiet, abiding strength which was there even in that frailty. Both of them remained still for some minutes. Time seemed to stand still, allowing them the room to absorb the significance of the unspoken things. Something more, something definitive, something eternal, Rhea sensed. Something he wanted to say to her. The courage to speak it, though, appeared to be building up in him. She found solace in the stillness. Just being still in the midst of something bigger than words can be the most sacred thing to do at times. Rhea, there's something I have to tell you, President Nelson said as he slowly raised his eyes to meet yours. Something that has long troubled my heart. Rhea could feel her breath catch as his voice quivered. She was prepared for whatever he said next. It would linger in her mind indelibly. With his fragile hands folded together, President Nelson sat back gently, appearing to muster courage. They were surrounded by a heavy, serene air. Sister Rio's heart was pounding as she leaned forward ever so slightly. The impending threat felt heavy, but she was unaware of what it was. After a considerable delay, his sweet voice, which was both compassionate and powerful enough to rock her to her very core, broke through the silence. He started by telling Rhea not to allow fear to stifle his faith. The words seemed to breathe life into the atmosphere. He said them more slowly this time, and she briefly believed she had misheard, but then she felt them deeply. Faith must never be stifled by fear. It was as powerful as a full sermon, although it was only one phrase long. As the words resounded in her head, she felt a knot in her throat and flashed back to all the times she had repressed the urge to speak her mind, take risks, or be true to herself. President Nelson gave her an observant look, as if he could read her mind. Your words have always been genuine, he commented, his tone kind. However, there are times when people just don't get hearts like yours. Never allow themselves to be silenced by others who misunderstand, reject, or interrogate you. It takes guts to speak the truth, but staying silent is easier. In Reyna's eyes, tears sprung up. Fearing offense, being different, or venturing outside of her comfort zone were some of the reasons she had been hesitant to speak in the past. For a long time, such anxieties had been with her. Something changed in her when she heard those words from him. It went beyond mere advice. I felt compelled to do it. With a little but resolute quiver in his voice, President Nelson continued. God wants soft voices that aren't scared to be quiet, and he wants soft hearts that aren't scared to be bold. That equilibrium is yours, Ree. You have that talent. Keep going even when times are tough. He seemed to be choking back tears as he waited a long time to speak. Never doubt yourself, he murmured. Keep in mind that having faith isn't about having all the answers. It is about having faith when all logic fails. Her spirit was pierced by every syllable. His words seemed to reach out to everyone who had ever faced the challenge of being faithful in the face of growing worldly uncertainty, rather than simply her. Ree was both astonished and profoundly grateful. His tone was innocent, his love was paternal, and his spiritual insight was above rank and age. Nothing would come out of her mouth to express her gratitude to him. Rather, she merely nodded, her quivering hand resting on her chest. With a subtle smile, President Nelson appeared to comprehend her reserved demeanor. You don't need to answer, he whispered. Just promise me you'll remember? It was as if time stood still at that second. As if bestowed with a delicate benediction, the light streaming in through the window had intensified and was now reaching the room's perimeter. The guy who had led her, instructed her, and now given her a message that seemed almost sacred stared back at her as Rhea gazed at him. There was a feeling in her that told her this was no ordinary meeting. His parting words were these, and they applied not only to her but to everyone she would come to know. She couldn't stop thinking about those remarks as she walked out of the room. Faith must never be stifled by fear. She murmured them softly as if in a prayer, oblivious to the fact that they would become the guiding principle of her life and the message she would eventually convey to everyone on earth. After leaving that peaceful room, Sister Rhea couldn't help but notice that President Nelson seemed different. There had always been an aura of serenity and assurance around him, which raised the spirits of those around him. A new type of tranquility, like the quiet after a long storm, washed over her now, though. At last, she understood that beneath his gentle gaze and comforting remarks, there had always been an unseen battle, one he had never let anyone else witness. The hopes, dreams, and burdens of millions of people who had come to trust in President Nelson had been borne by him during the years. He bore the weight of every sermon, choice, and message. His infectious joy, steadfast faith, and boundless energy were all visible to all. They were never privy to his worried nights, or times of doubt about whether he was making a difference. His poise in the face of what must have been intolerable strain was something Sister Reyna had always admired. Seated with the recollection of his feeble hands and quivering voice, however, she at last beheld the man behind the mantle. Not the leader, but the subordinate who had silently endured more than anyone could fathom. Long ago, after a particularly intense leadership meeting, she recalled his words to her. He lingered in the deserted hall, all by himself after everyone else had departed. When she inquired about his level of fatigue, he said with a soft smile, "A little, but it's a good kind of tired, the kind that comes when you've spent yourself for something that matters." At the time, she had assumed it was merely a matter of modesty. At last, it hit her. It was the truth. His power had always been something he could choose. The bravery to press on in the face of adversity rather than its complete absence. She had observed that he was breathing more slowly, and his hands were less steady during those peaceful moments in the conference room. His eyes carried the silent weight of a man who had witnessed too much and was prepared to sleep. Some part of her advised her against inquiring as to whether he was okay. He was not in need of sympathy. It was illuminating. He and other leaders like him never sought pity. Wrapped in solitude and prayer, they bore their sorrow with honor. Within the Christian community, whispers began to circulate as time passed. Word on the street was that President Nelson's health was deteriorating. However, Sister Rhea never became involved in the conjecture. She could have skipped it. It had been pointed up to her in that last encounter. His comments seemed like a farewell wrapped in advice, and his voice became softer as a result. Behind the public display of strength, she was aware was a secret capitulation. Not because he is weak, but because he is at ease. A man is progressively becoming ready to transmit the torch. That topic kept coming back to Rhea as she sat alone in her office one late evening. Faith must never be stifled by fear. He seemed to have picked those words for both of them. Her and himself. Perhaps he was trying to tell hers and himself that true courage is not in stubbornly clinging but in having faith to let go when the moment is right. Instead of grief, Rhea silently wept that night over her thankfulness. The humanity and truth beneath the title had been shown to her. Even though it sapped his vitality, President Nelson had given his all to the cause he loved. He was not weak because of his buried pain. Devotion was demonstrated. She came to the realization that sometimes the most effective leaders are the ones who endure silent suffering, not for the sake of world sympathy, but so that humanity might maintain its faith. Sister Rio carried the memories of that day with her like an ethereal echo. It would never go away. Even after weeks had passed, she continued to see President Nelson's soft smile, hear his quivering voice, and sense the subtle gravity of his parting remarks with each time she shut her eyes. Even though she didn't know it at the moment, the encounter turned out to be more than a casual chat. This was a sacred handoff, a time when one person's legacy was given to another. She felt her heart sink as she learned that President Nelson's health had deteriorated. At home by herself, she stared at the empty notebook she'd brought to that last meeting. The only thing on its pages was a single line she'd jotted down after she left. Faith must never be stifled by fear. Her plea, her solace, and her vow had all been encapsulated in those few words. She had an unspoken resolve that she could not stand by while his message languished. A final invitation to see him was extended to her the following morning. Quietness and low lighting filled the space. In the background, machines hummed gently. As if in profound sleep, President Nelson's closed eyes gave him a delicate but serene appearance. A small smile spread across his face as he cautiously opened eyes and beheld her. The same kind of smile that she had formerly encountered in innumerable meetings. He spoke in a low voice, barely audible. "About you coming." Still mute, Reyna gave a silent nod. Feeling his tender, soft hand, she took it in hers. They remained silent for what seemed like an eternity. For all the things that words failed to convey, there was an eerie stillness that conveyed comprehension. She said, "I will keep your words alive, President." As tears welled up in her eyes. "This much I vow." A profound expression of appreciation spread across his face as his expression softened even further. And that, he whispered, was all he could have hoped for. The focus should be on the task and not on Neroa. All that matters is the message. The voice of the voiceless must be preserved. Faith is important, and you must never stop saying that. Her heart was shattered by his words. Her eyes welled up with tears, and she couldn't hold them back. However, she finally let them flow freely. Instead, he timidly reached out and gently brushed her palm, seemingly trying to console her. "Please, don't weep for me," he whispered. "God has shown his kindness. I have had enough. I will give it to you. Take the lead with the same guts you used to be afraid of." Again, the room was dead still. In fact, she could hardly hear her own heartbeat, a rhythm that mingled grief and gratitude.